I never expected to catch my brother sneaking out of a hotel with someone who wasn't his wife, and that moment changed everything between us. My brother, Jake, and I were as close as brothers could be, at least that's how it felt for most of our lives. Growing up, we shared everything: toys, secrets, advice. He was my best friend. Even as adults, we stayed tight, navigating through life's challenges together. We were both in our 30s now, and Jake had long since settled down. He was married to Emily, a smart, kind woman who had brought out the best in him. I always thought Jake had everything figured out. He had a stable job, a house in the suburbs, and a wife who adored him. Me, on the other hand, I was still trying to figure things out, still single and wondering when I would grow up like my brother. I admired his life, the security and comfort it seemed to bring him. At least, that's how I saw it from the outside. Everything changed on that night when I saw him at the hotel. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished a long week at work. I was heading out of town for a short weekend getaway with some old friends, something we did every few months to blow off steam. Before hitting the road, I had to stop by a hotel to pick up a package from a friend who was staying there for a business trip. It was a quick errand, and I planned to be in and out in 5 minutes. As I pulled into the hotel parking lot, my eyes caught sight of a familiar truck. Jake's truck. At first, I didn't think much of it. Jake traveled a lot for work, and it wouldn't have been unusual for him to be meeting a client or staying the night somewhere for a meeting the next morning. But something felt off. It was too close to home for him to be staying the night here, and it was a Friday night. Emily would never let him stay in a hotel just a few miles away when he could be home with her. Curiosity got the better of me. I parked my car a few rows over and decided to walk inside. As I entered the hotel lobby, I immediately spotted Jake walking out of the elevator, but he wasn't alone. A woman was with him. She was tall, blonde, and definitely not Emily. They were laughing and talking quietly, standing closer than what was appropriate for business. I ducked behind a pillar, watching them as they crossed the lobby toward the exit. The way the woman brushed her hand against his arm and the way he smiled back at her, it wasn't innocent. They were more than just colleagues. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to burst out from behind the pillar and confront him right then and there, but I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as they stepped outside. They didn't even notice me as they walked out to the parking lot. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My brother, the one I looked up to all my life, was cheating on his wife. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to wrap my mind around what I had just witnessed. My initial shock quickly turned into anger. How could Jake do this to Emily? She didn't deserve this. She was one of the most caring, genuine people I knew. They had been married for almost 7 years, and everyone always talked about how perfect their relationship was. They had become that couple in our friend group, the one everyone admired, the couple that seemed to have everything figured out. I always envied Jake for finding someone like her, especially when I was still searching for something even close to that. I thought about calling him out right there in the parking lot, but I hesitated. I didn't know how to confront him without making things worse. So I left. I grabbed the package from my friend, got in my car, and drove away, but my mind stayed back in that hotel parking lot, replaying what I had seen over and over again. The drive to the cabin with my friends that night was one of the longest of my life. I couldn't focus on the road, couldn't enjoy the music or the thought of the weekend ahead. All I could think about was Jake and the woman, and how Emily had no idea what was going on. I felt sick to my stomach. How was I supposed to face him now? How could I go back to normal, knowing what I knew? By the time I arrived at the cabin, my friends were already inside, cracking open beers and getting ready to unwind. But I couldn't shake the image of Jake and that woman. My friend Nate noticed I was off and pulled me aside. "Everything all right, man? You've been quiet since you got here." I considered telling him, but I couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I just shook my head. "Yeah, just a long week at work. I'm fine." I wasn't fine. The weekend passed in a blur, and while my friends were laughing, drinking, and sharing stories, I was in my head, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me thought it wasn't my place to get involved, but the other part of me couldn't stand by and watch Jake ruin his life, and Emily's, without saying something. When I got back home on Sunday night, I still didn't have a plan. I thought about confronting Jake directly, but I wasn't sure if that would make things better or worse. What if he denied it? What if he didn't care? Or worse, what if he asked me to stay silent? Days passed, and I found myself avoiding Jake. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't invite him over like I usually did. But eventually, he reached out to me. He called one evening, asking if I wanted to grab a beer after work. I couldn't avoid him forever, so I agreed, hoping I'd find the right moment to bring it up. We met at our usual spot, a local bar that we'd been going to since we were in college. Jake was his usual self, cracking jokes and talking about work. For a moment, I almost forgot about what I'd seen. Almost. It wasn't until we were a few drinks in that I finally gathered the courage to say something. "Jake, I saw you last Friday." He looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "At the hotel," I said, my voice steady but low. "I saw you with that woman." His face went pale. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at his beer, avoiding eye contact. I could see the gears turning in his head, like he was trying to figure out how to respond. "It's not what you think, Tom," he finally said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "It looked pretty clear to me, Jake." "Who is she?" He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "Her name's Lisa. We work together." "How long has this been going on?" Jake didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "About 6 months." 6 months. For 6 months, my brother had been lying to Emily, sneaking around behind her back. I felt the anger rising in me again, but I tried to stay calm. "And Emily? Does she know?" "No," Jake said quickly. "She has no idea. And I don't want her to know, Tom. Please, don't say anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he ask me to keep something like this a secret? Emily didn't deserve to be lied to, and I didn't want to be a part of that lie. "You've got to tell her, Jake," I said firmly. "You can't keep doing this." "I know," he muttered, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "I know I need to stop, but things with Emily haven't been great for a while. I don't know what to do." "Then fix it," I snapped. "Talk to her. Go to counseling. Do whatever it takes. But this? Sneaking around with someone else? It's only going to blow up in your face." Jake didn't say anything, just stared at the table. I could see the guilt weighing on him, but I wasn't sure if it was enough to make him change. We sat in silence for a long time before I finally stood up to leave. "I'm not going to say anything," I told him, "but you need to fix this, Jake. Before it's too late." Weeks passed, and I tried to put the whole thing out of my mind, but it wasn't easy. Every time I saw Jake or Emily, the guilt gnawed at me. I hated keeping the secret, hated that Jake had put me in this position. But I hoped that he was doing the right thing, that he was working on his marriage like he said he would. Then, one night, Emily called me. I could tell from the tone of her voice that something was wrong. "Tom, can we talk?" she asked, her voice shaky. I think something's going on with Jake. He's been acting really strange lately, and I don't know what to do." I felt my heart drop. I had hoped this day wouldn't come, but deep down, I knew it was inevitable. I couldn't lie to her. Not anymore. "Emily, there's something you need to know." When I told her the truth, it was one of the hardest conversations I'd ever had. Emily was devastated. She cried, screamed, and eventually thanked me for being honest with her. In the days that followed, she confronted Jake, and after weeks of painful conversations, they decided to separate. Jake moved out, and Emily filed for divorce not long after. Jake tried to make things right, but the damage was done. The trust was gone, and their marriage was beyond repair. Watching it all fall apart was harder than I ever imagined, especially knowing that I had played a part in it. It's been nearly a year since that night at the hotel, and things between Jake and I have never been the same. We talk occasionally, but there's a distance now, a weight that hangs over every conversation. He's not the same brother I once knew, and maybe I'm not the same person either. The whole experience changed me. It made me realize that even the people we think we know best can be capable of things we never imagined. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing by telling Emily. Maybe it wasn't my place. Maybe I should have stayed out of it. But deep down, I know the truth would have come out eventually. It always does. Life has moved on, but the scars of betrayal remain. They're a reminder that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to mend, and that even the strongest relationships can crumble under the weight of deception. I found out my best friend was cheating on his fiancée, and I had to decide whether to stay loyal to him or tell her the truth. I've known Ben for as long as I can remember. We grew up on the same block, went to the same schools, even joined the same college fraternity. If you asked anyone, they'd tell you Ben and I were practically brothers. We had been through everything together, from drunken nights in college to the sobering realities of adulthood. So, when Ben told me he was getting engaged to Sarah, I was genuinely happy for him. Sarah was smart, kind, and seemed to ground Ben in a way no one else ever had. For the first time in years, I thought he was ready to settle down. But everything changed the night I caught him in a lie I never saw coming. It was a Friday night when I first started to suspect something was off. We had planned a guys' night out, something we hadn't done in a while. Ben was his usual self, cracking jokes, ordering rounds of beers, and making everyone laugh. But halfway through the night, he stepped outside to take a phone call. I didn't think much of it at the time, but he was gone for nearly half an hour. When he came back, he was distracted, his usual carefree attitude replaced with something heavier, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Everything okay?" I asked as he slid back into his seat. "Yeah, man, just work stuff. You know how it is," he shrugged it off. I didn't press him on it, but the rest of the night felt off. Ben was quieter, more distant, and by the time we called it a night, he barely said goodbye before slipping out into the night. The next morning, I got a message from Sarah, asking if I knew where Ben had been the previous night. She sounded worried, which was strange considering Ben had told me she was fine with our night out. I didn't know what to say, so I told her the truth, that Ben had been with us for most of the evening but left earlier than expected. Her reply was short, and I could sense something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice a pattern. Ben was more distant than usual, constantly on his phone, texting someone, and leaving mid-conversation to take calls. It wasn't long before I found out why. One afternoon, I was grabbing coffee near my office when I spotted Ben across the street. He wasn't alone. He was with another woman, someone I had never seen before. They were sitting close, too close, sharing a private conversation that felt far from innocent. I watched from a distance, unsure of what to do. Was this just a friend? A colleague? Or was this what I feared it was? My heart sank as I watched him lean in and kiss her. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Ben, my best friend, the guy who was supposed to be getting married in a few months, was cheating on Sarah. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did Sarah know? What would she do if she found out? I debated confronting him right then and there, but I held back. I needed to figure out how to handle this. Ben was like a brother to me, but Sarah, she didn't deserve this. For days, I wrestled with the decision. Do I talk to Ben first? Do I go straight to Sarah? Every time I saw them together, my guilt grew. Sarah was planning their wedding with a smile on her face, completely oblivious to what was going on behind her back. And Ben? He acted like everything was normal, as if he wasn't living a double life. One weekend, things came to a head. Ben, Sarah, and a group of our mutual friends planned a casual weekend getaway to a cabin about 2 hours outside of town. It was supposed to be a relaxing break, barbecuing, hanging out by the fire pit, and just enjoying each other's company. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a cloud. As soon as we arrived, I could tell something was off between Ben and Sarah. They were arguing quietly when they thought no one was watching. I caught snippets of their conversations, Sarah accusing Ben of not being present, of being distant. Ben brushed her off, saying work had been stressful, but the tension between them was palpable. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up late by the fire. Ben came outside, grabbed a beer, and sat down next to me. We sat in silence for a while, just staring at the flames. I could feel the weight of what I knew pressing down on me, and I wondered if tonight would be the night I finally said something. "Things are weird between you and Sarah," I said carefully, testing the waters. Ben sighed and took a long sip of his beer. "Yeah, man. I don't know what's going on with us." I wanted to scream that I knew exactly what was going on, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I asked, "Is everything okay?" He didn't answer right away. The crackling of the fire filled the silence between us. "I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. The wedding, the commitment. It's a lot, you know?" I nodded, trying to stay calm. "If you're not ready, you need to be honest with her. She deserves to know what's really going on." He looked at me then, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. For a split second, I thought he was going to come clean. But instead, he shook his head. "Nah, it's just cold feet. I'll get over it." I didn't push any further. Part of me was relieved that I didn't have to deal with the fallout of telling him what I knew, but the other part of me felt sick. He wasn't going to stop, and Sarah was going to be the one who got hurt. The trip ended without incident, but the weight of what I knew still hung over me. I couldn't keep living with this secret, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. A few weeks after we returned, Sarah invited me and a few friends over for a small dinner party. Ben was out of town for work, and she wanted to catch up. It was a low-key evening, good food, good conversation, but I couldn't help noticing that Sarah seemed off. She was quieter than usual, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. At the end of the night, as everyone was leaving, she pulled me aside. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked quietly. We sat down in the living room, and she looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Has Ben been acting strange lately?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I mean, more than usual. I feel like he's hiding something from me." My stomach dropped. This was it. The moment I had been dreading for weeks. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty. She already knew something was wrong, she just needed confirmation. Sarah, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. There's something I need to tell you. Telling her the truth was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sarah broke down in tears, and I could hear the pain in her voice as she tried to process what I had just told her. She thanked me for being honest, but I knew that nothing I said could take away the hurt. Ben tried to apologize, but it was too late. The damage was done, and Sarah called off the wedding. Their relationship was over, and Ben was left to pick up the pieces of the life he had shattered. As for me, I lost my best friend that day. Ben and I drifted apart, and while I don't regret telling Sarah the truth, I can't help but feel like I lost more than just a friendship. I lost the person I thought I knew, the brother I had grown up with. But in the end, I realized that loyalty to the truth mattered more than loyalty to a friend who had lost his way. Now, this would be a good point to expand further, adding layers to the emotional fallout from the revelation and the impact it had on relationships surrounding Ben, Sarah, and the narrator. Here's where we can add more details. In the days that followed, the aftermath of Sarah calling off the wedding was felt by all of us in our friend group. No one wanted to take sides openly, but it was clear that opinions were being formed. Some blamed Ben, whispering behind his back, while others wondered if Sarah had overreacted. But the truth was, everyone knew that cheating is an unforgivable act, especially after years of being in what seemed like a stable and loving relationship. I started getting texts and calls from mutual friends, trying to get the inside scoop. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. Some of the guys thought I was being disloyal by telling Sarah, while others admitted that they would have done the same. My loyalty to Ben was questioned more than once, and I started feeling isolated in a group of people I had known my whole life. Expanding on the fallout with Ben. I tried reaching out to Ben a couple of times after the breakup, but every time I did, he either didn't respond or sent curt, one-word replies. It was clear that he wasn't ready to talk, and I had no idea if he would ever forgive me for what I had done. One day, a few weeks after the breakup, Ben finally reached out to me. I had been preparing for this conversation in my head for days, running through every possible scenario of how it might go down. But when Ben finally called, his voice was more subdued than I had expected. He asked if we could meet for a beer at our usual spot, and I agreed, not knowing what to expect. When I arrived at the bar, Ben was already there, nursing a beer and staring blankly at the TV screen above the bar. I sat down across from him, and for a few moments, neither of us spoke. It felt like a lifetime had passed since the last time we had seen each other, even though it had only been a few weeks. Finally, Ben broke the silence. "I messed up, man," he said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the bar. "I messed up, and I don't know how to fix it." I didn't say anything at first. I just let him talk. He told me about how he had been feeling overwhelmed by the idea of marriage, how he had started questioning whether he was ready for the commitment. He admitted that the affair had started out as a distraction, something to help him escape the pressures of his impending wedding. But as time went on, it spiraled out of control. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Ben said, his eyes glassy with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt Sarah." Hearing Ben confess his regrets was difficult. It was the first time I had seen him vulnerable in years. He was always the guy who had everything under control, or at least pretended to. Now, he was just a broken man who had lost everything. We sat in silence for a while, and eventually, Ben looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. "You did the right thing by telling her," he said quietly. "I hate that you did it, but I know you were looking out for her. And maybe, deep down, you were looking out for me too." His words hit me harder than I thought they would. For weeks, I had been questioning whether I had made the right decision, whether I had betrayed my best friend in the process of trying to protect someone else. But hearing Ben acknowledge that I had done the right thing, even if it cost us our friendship, brought me a sense of closure. Expanding on the consequences for Ben. In the weeks and months that followed, Ben tried to piece his life back together. He moved out of the apartment he and Sarah had shared and took a job in another city, hoping to start fresh. I heard bits and pieces about him through mutual friends, but we didn't keep in touch much after that night. Our friendship had been too deeply fractured, and while I didn't regret telling Sarah the truth, I knew that things would never be the same between Ben and me. As for Sarah, she eventually moved on too. I ran into her a few months later at a mutual friends party, and though the initial meeting was awkward, we ended up talking for a while. She thanked me again for being honest with her, and while I could still see traces of the hurt Ben had caused, she seemed stronger, more resilient. "I'll never understand why he did it," she admitted. "But I'm grateful that I found out when I did. It's better to be alone than to be with someone who isn't committed to you." Her words stuck with me long after that night. They reminded me that, no matter how painful the truth might be, it's always better than living a lie. And in the end, that was the lesson I took away from all of this, that loyalty to the truth is what matters most. Even if it means losing a friend, even if it means causing pain, the truth will always come to light. And when it does, it's better to be on the side of honesty than to have kept quiet out of fear.